Hi, y'all. So for my presentation, I am going to be talking about Asparagopsis taxiformis in the ruminant diet. So first things first, seaweed. When I think of seaweed, I think of otters and their little kelp beds, or I'm thinking of the wrap around my sushi roll. But seaweed as a feedstuff for livestock, don't see it. But in actuality, seaweed has been part of the ruminant diet for thousands of years, dating all the way back to ancient Greece. And it is a common staple in coastal communities used to feed their ruminant animals. So the thing about seaweed is that it's a macroalgae that can be split into three groups. The first is Phyophyta, which is brown seaweed. The second is Chlorophyta, which is green seaweed. And the third is Rhodophyta, which is red seaweed. And in this presentation, we're going to be looking at red seaweed and more specifically the species Asparagopsis taxiformis. There has been a lot of research coming out recently about this seaweed species and examining the impact that it has on ruminant nutrition and on the microbiome. So why are researchers looking at Asparagopsis taxiformis? And my slides have been loading really slow, so bear with me. It might take a second. There we go. So why? The first reason that researchers have been looking is because livestock industry contribution to greenhouse gases. So the livestock sector contributes around 8 to 18% of greenhouse gas emissions. And most of those emissions are primarily coming from enteric methane, which enteric methane is when feedstuffs go into the rumen, the microbial population starts to break them down. And one of the byproducts of that fermentation is enteric methane, which is then released via eructation. And so this is the main contributing factor from the livestock sector. And the other aspect of that is that methane is a waste product. It represents an inefficiency in feed conversion because the animal is not able to use that for energy. And so if we were able to find a way to eliminate some or most of enteric methane emissions from ruminant animals, not only are we increasing our sustainability, but we're also increasing production parameters. The second part of this is that we have this responsibility to feed a growing population. And the United Nations is estimating that we're going to need a 50% increase in food production by 2050. And part of that increase is going to be animal products. Part of the challenge of that is that half of our habitable land is already in agricultural use. So converting more land for feedstuffs to feed our livestock species is going to be difficult. But the exciting aspect of this is that aquaculture, and especially in the ocean, is right now an underutilized tool, because even though the ocean accounts for 71% of Earth's surface, it only accounts for 2% of the world's calories. So the thought is if we are able to grow aquaculture's foodstuffs that are in the ocean, then perhaps this can help compensate for the limited land that we have left to convert to feedstuffs for livestock species. It would be another avenue that we could use to produce livestock animals. So what has studies on Asparagopsis found? Starting with in vitro studies, this was a very simple study design done by a Swedish group. And what they really just wanted to examine was, does Asparagopsis have anti-methogenic capabilities? And so what they did is they tested Asparagopsis versus a known anti-methogenic compound. And what the results show is that Asparagopsis has similar capabilities of reducing methane production compared to this compound. And it's loading again. And our second in vitro study, which was done by an Australian group, they took this starting premise that Asparagopsis reduces methane production. And they wanted to figure out in their experimental design what compound in Asparagopsis is responsible for these anti-methogenic activities. And so what they did is they used extracts to find compounds in Asparagopsis, the metabolites that had anti-methogenic capabilities, and then further tested those compounds in varying concentrations to see which one or ones were primarily responsible for this. And what the results showed was that this compound, bromoform, is the primary one responsible for Asparagopsis being able to reduce methane production. So then the knowledge found in these in vitro studies were a strong basis for the in vivo studies coming up. And this first one was done by an Australian group. They created this treatment design with the number of days on seaweed and testing at different concentrations of Asparagopsis fed, which was done on an organic matter intake basis. And what the results show, which here on the right, you have low, mid, and high concentration levels. And the mid was 0.15%, the high was 0.2%. But at that high concentration, they saw a 98% reduction in enteric methane, which is a drastic difference. And then on the left, these results show that the mid and high concentrations of Asparagopsis were able to accomplish an increase in average daily gain in their steers. So then a second in vivo study done by an American group changed the parameters a little bit, where they wanted to look at, okay, how do high, mid, and low forage diets impact Asparagopsis' ability to reduce methane production within the rumen. And what the results on their left show was that even in a low forage setting, if Asparagopsis was included in the diet of feedlot steers at 0.5% organic matter intake, it was able to reduce enteric methane by 80%. And then on the right, their production parameters differed slightly from the previous study. They did not observe a difference in average daily gain, and they did observe a decrease at that high concentration of Asparagopsis to have a slight decrease in dry matter intake. But overall, the feed conversion efficiency ended up being statistically significant. Asparagopsis at high concentrations actually increased feed conversion efficiency. So this is a lot of data and a lot of research. So breaking it down, what does it all mean? The first premise is that Asparagopsis is anti-methogenic. It is a natural compound that has, or a natural feedstuff that has the ability to reduce methane production in the rumen. And the reason why, or the main driving factor, is that the metabolite of Asparagopsis that has a significant anti-methogenic activity is bromoform. And so then putting that together, it also has comparable methane reduction abilities to other anti-methogenic compounds. And this is important because with increasing concerns from consumers about ionophore usage, antibiotics, things that they consider to be unnatural, finding natural compounds or natural feedstuffs that are able to accomplish the same or similar effects that our industry standards currently use is going to be vital and part of our adaptation to the changing times. And so the last part is that, and I think this one's probably the most important, is that Asparagopsis produces a statistically significant decrease in methane production. And it does this without compromising production parameters. So not only are we decreasing enteric methane emission, which is helping with decreasing our greenhouse gas contribution, it is also increasing our feed conversion efficiency of our animals, which will help producers. So kind of wrapping this all up, when it loads will be sort of like the final part, which is that Asparagopsis has challenges in the industry getting approved and becoming widespread. Let's see. Okay, it skipped. One sec. I pause. Okay, now the slide's loaded. Apologies for the presentation issues. I don't know why it refuses to load, or it's just really slow. But my last point and like sort of the conclusion of wrapping it all up is, even though these research results are really positive and are really pointing to including Asparagopsis in ruminant rations, there are challenges still facing its widespread use. The first is that more research does need to be conducted. Like I said, the current studies are extremely promising, but they also were smaller studies. The sample sizes were about 20 feedlot steers in each of them. And so different ones, larger studies over a longer period of time using different parameters need to be conducted to continue to sort of confirm what we are seeing with Asparagopsis and its ability to reduce methane production within the rumen. The second issue is going to be scaling production. There aren't really good models for doing industrial seaweed production as a feedstuff. And in fact, there's only one company in the world, Volta Green Tech, which is located in Sweden, that even produces Asparagopsis at a factory level. And they only have one factory. They're still figuring out how to scale it up to have multiple factories going. So creating a production system that would make it viable for commercial use is going to be a challenge. And lastly, since Asparagopsis and the research coming out about it is so new, there is going to be the regulation approval aspect that Asparagopsis taxiformis is going to have to pass safety and consistency considerations in order to be used in the commercial chain. And so, like I said, it is extremely exciting research to see an alternative feedstuff that is extremely promising with reducing methane production in animals, and not only addressing a sustainability issue, but also addressing food production issues in ruminant livestock. So I am excited to see more studies coming out about this seaweed and its potential to be used in cattle rations. And so that's my presentation. Thank you for listening. And I have a few credit slides real quick. If it'll click, kind of click, it's glitching again. So my other slide's my references slide, but thank you for watching.